Our presenter is Ms. Lori Holden, who is an active blogger and the author of The Open-Hearted Way to Adoption. This new guidebook is very attractive to adoption agencies around the country who are eagerly reading it. Lori writes at the Huffington Post and is a regular columnist for the Denver Post's website, milehighmamas.com. Parenting Magazine calls her blog a must-read, and Adoptive Families Magazine has named her a top blogger. She is an active reviewer for Path to Parenthood, which was formerly the American Fertility Association, and is frequently called upon to be a guest for radio and television. We're so glad to have her with us this morning.
Thank you so much for having me, and I am just thrilled that all of you are joining me here today to talk about a subject that I am just passionate about, because I think openness is one of the key ingredients that can make this journey into parenting and through parenting a lot easier and more enjoyable and just a lot richer. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here with me. An overview of what we're going to do today. We're going to have four main parts. We're going to talk about who comes to the table in an adoption. I come from the world of traditional adoption, but a lot of the principles I'm going to be talking about today will apply also to embryo adoption. We're going to talk about a split that a baby may have in these kinds of situations. We're going to talk about our own triggers, and we're going to talk about a way of moving toward a both-and paradigm. So those are some of the things that we're going to cover in the next hour. And I want to start with a quote by a friend of mine, a fellow blogger in Vancouver. Her name is Harriet Fancott. And Harriet says, "Open adoption is much more than a contract or a philosophy or an ideal. It's an act of bravery and courage by all who enter." And I want to focus for just a moment on the word courage, because the first four letters of that come from the same root as coronary. And I don't want to give you a coronary in the next hour, but I do want you to be thinking of the root of this word has to do with the heart. And the title of my book has to do with the heart. And so we're going to be doing a lot of thinking about how we can move through, be guided more and more by our hearts. So as Harriet says, parenting always stretches people to become bigger than they ever thought they'd be. And parenting by adoption boosts that stretch even further. And openness, which isn't the same as contact, we'll get into that, but openness is what will allow us to do all this stretching more mindfully and more gracefully. Openness turned out to be such a great idea for me and for my family, and it's not always easy, but it's so very worth it. So first, let's look at who are the players who comes to the table. I start my in-person workshops with an exercise that we call family sculpting. And the goal of family sculpting is to get people into each other's shoes. I assign a role to each of the attendees. And today we're not talking about domestic adoption with a birth mother, but about embryo adoption with both a donor and adopting parents. And even though we're not face-to-face and we won't be able to role play, I'd like you to participate with me by visualizing people coming to the table. So at first, we're going to have, on one side of the table, we're going to have the donating or the birth parents. We have a mother who has children, and she has remaining embryos that she's not able to give birth to. We have a father who has children that he's actively raising, and he has no desire to have more children with these extra embryos. We also have the children, or the child or the children of this couple, probably 5 years old or more. And where are these people coming from? What are they feeling? They may be feeling relief that they've built their family. They may be feeling empathy that there's another couple out there that has not been able to build a family. They may be wanting to do the right thing with their remaining embryos. They may have anxiety about one day telling their own children about these biological siblings. They may have some worry that the recipient parents will want something from them. They may be worried that when a baby is born as a result of the donation, that they themselves might want the baby back. So these are some of the thoughts that could be going on for the donor parents. And on the other side of the table, the recipient or the adopting parents, we have a woman who's been treated maybe multiple times for infertility without achieving a successful pregnancy. We have her husband who has watched his wife suffer loss after loss. He may also be worried about the financial outlay. We have the parents of those two people who have watched their adult children struggle with the family building, and perhaps they long for grandchildren. How might they be feeling? How might all these people be feeling? What are their inner thoughts? They may be thinking, will we ever have a child? Will embryo adoption work for us? Will a donor family choose us? Will they want their baby back one day? How involved will they want to be in parenting my baby? And what could this arrangement possibly look like? So as you can see, both sides come to the table full of fears and anxiety. But to make this arrangement work, they have to work through that and become fearless. And how are they going to do that? In our in-person workshops, we take participants through various scenes in an adoption placement and have them show with their body positioning how things feel. And we get them to be aware of these fears and the anxiety. And this awareness is the key, because fear is experienced not only in the mind but also in the body. So if we can get it to come out in the body, we can be more aware of it. So consider these questions. On the placing family side, how does it feel in your body right now to contemplate the options of what to do with leftover embryos? How does it feel to look at all your options, none of them which are optimal, but decide that adoption is the best of your available options? On the adopting family side, how does it feel to find out you're infertile? What does that moment feel like? How does it feel to tell your family members that you're not going to be able to add to the family tree? And how does it feel to go through all those tests and treatments and procedures and have your hopes dashed again and again? And how does it feel to look at your available options, none of them optimal, and choose adoption, a non-genetic option, as a way of building your family? Lots of feelings swirling around, centered around fear. So both sides have come through a trail of tears and loss, and family trees are being pruned left and right, left branchless, and that's hard for everyone involved. We have fears aplenty, but we can become fearless, and you're about to find out that it's not so hard to do that. So eventually these two sides come together in our workshops, and we see their emotions in relation to each other. And at this moment, we're wondering, how does it feel to know about your child's other parents for the first time, to know their names and their contact information, and maybe even to meet them? And how does it feel to consider telling your children about the unique way that you came to be a family? Do your adrenal glands squirt fear at the prospect of having this conversation and finding the words to say? And here's the first step of this critical shift from fearful to fearless. In addition to seeing from the perspective of the grown-ups at the table, which I think we're all kind of used to trying to do that, I want you to begin to think about things from the child's point of view. People do fearless things all the time out of love for their children, and these children who become teens and adults and their own people. And I'm going to reiterate that quite a bit, because right now we're kind of focused on a baby, but the baby does become a toddler, a school child, a tween, a teenager, and finally an adult, all with their own perspectives. So if you watch this movie play out in your mind about how it all feels to have two sets of parents come together on separate paths to give life and to give a life, think about how the baby at the center might feel when she grows up. Maybe she'll be curious about it all, maybe she won't, but you don't get to know that at the beginning of the journey. So let's talk a little bit about the baby, the child, the teenager at the center. Unlike with traditional adoption, here we're not dealing with an unplanned pregnancy, but with a very planned one. Some of the dynamics, though, remain applicable for in both traditional adoption and in embryo adoptions. We're talking about a child at the center who will experience a split between her biology, the DNA that she's born with, and her biography, the life that's written by those that we call family. And here are some thoughts that she may one day have as she grows into her own person, which she will. She may wonder about her medical background. about her genetic siblings. She may fantasize about the gene pool that she's not swimming in. She may wonder about meeting these mysterious but familiar people. Whether or not the baby is separated at birth from a biological mother, like in traditional adoption, or if the child will one day realize that she doesn't share genetic traits with her parents, we must recognize that she will have loss to work through at some point. Now, I once heard, let me see here. I once heard that back in the days when we kept adoption a secret and we were all supposed to act as if it had never happened, that being raised by parents you're not genetically related to felt a little bit like being a dachshund in a family of golden retrievers. And this is a quote from an adoptee blogger. She says, "It was like two golden retrievers adopting a dachshund. They were busy trying to understand why I wasn't a golden retriever. They did their best to help me be a golden retriever. Who can blame them? This is what they knew how to be. They didn't know how to be a short-legged long dog. They wanted to help me overcome my short-legged long dogness, but they were at a loss and they gave up." So like the ugly duckling story or this story, if you look at things from the swan's point of view or the dachshund's point of view, things look different than if you don't go to the trouble to do so. So in our workshops, we close the family sculpting exercise by imagining how things might look between the two families at the child's future birthday party or another milestone, like a recital or a ball game or a graduation. And we focus especially on how things are for the child, with the biological side of him or her either being acknowledged or denied. So obviously, you can see that this family sculpting exercise is more about gaining the perspective of the baby at the center than about the grown-ups who create the connections or don't on the child's behalf. Because this is how we move from fearful to fearless, with the shift in perspective to the tiny but sure to grow person at the center. Okay. So we're going to talk now about splitting the baby. And I want to back up a little bit, and I want to tell you how I came to be here today. In 2007, when I'd already built my family through adoption, I discovered the online infertility community. And a good resource for you if you're interested in getting into that is stirrupqueens.com, like getting up in the stirrups, stirrupqueens.com. And then I found the online adoption community, and along the way I met some wonderfully wise people from sub-communities like surrogacy and adoptees and birth parents and people in donor gametes and others. So my roots are in Blogland, which is an incredibly fun and creative place. And I used to run a contest every March for something that I called Low Poetry. It was a limerick chick contest that culminated on St. Patrick's Day. And I was shocked to find how many infertile women had crazy talent at writing limericks. My theory is that it's a creative side effect of all those creation-oriented hormones we were on. So in case you don't know, a limerick is in the same format as the children's rhyme, Hickory Dickory Dock. And for this contest that I ran, it needed to mention another blogger in the infertility community. A woman named Erica from New York won 3 times, including this winning entry that I want to share with you, in which she cited a blogger named Wishing41. She says, "I'm an Irish gal who drinks whiskey. Sometimes I go home and get frisky. When the good deed is done, I'm wishing for one, or at least eat some Spam and some latke." So I love the creativity in there from my Blogland roots. And at this point, I want to take you to a hypothetical place. Let's go back to the person who lives with a split between her biology and her biography. I'm going to call her an adoptee for this discussion, and you know, of course, she could just as easily be a he. But think for a moment if we could fill a place like Times Square with just one demographic, adult adoptees, and imagine that we were to begin polling passersby and ask them just one question. And the question would be, which set of parents do you consider your real ones? Do you think more passersby would respond with, well, my real parents are the ones who raised me, duh? Or do you think more would say, my bio parents, of course? So kind of think about this in the back of your mind. Remember the story about King Solomon? Regardless of whether or not you subscribe to the Judeo-Christian tradition, this story is as much a cultural one as it is a religious one. So as you may recall, Solomon has been given the gift of wisdom by God. So when two women come to him fighting over the same baby, you know you're going to get the wisest answer possible. So the women come to his court, each claiming to be the real mother of the baby. Now, real is a word that we in adoption are quite familiar with. It's our nemesis. It sets up a winner versus the loser. It sets up the legitimate versus the negated. And our thoughts with the split automatically go into duality. Is she the real mom, or is it the other one? And this makes us weigh these unweighable importances of nature and nurture. But Solomon, in his wisdom, he didn't have to get into a debate about legitimacy and claim. Instead, he used the word real to mean child-centered and willing to lose it all for the sake of the child. His acid test, as you recall, was to order a servant to bring a sword to split that baby in half so that each woman could have half. You don't get much more fair than that, right? So one of the claimants agreed with the solution, but the other one screamed out her protest. No, don't kill the baby I love. I'd rather lose him than have him killed. And with this, Solomon knew who the real mother was. Now, one thing that's interesting, if you read this passage in the Bible, is that real is never equated with giving birth or not giving birth. We are told only, she is his real mother, give the baby to her. So real means the mother who was willing to lose it all for the sake of the child she claimed. Note here that it doesn't necessarily mean she loses it all. It means that she's willing to lose it all. Now, I bet everyone listening would recoil in horror if we were actually in that scene, cutting a child in half so that the needs of the grown-ups could be met. But take away that literal sword and replace it with a figurative sword. Do we inadvertently, mindlessly, do we ever split the baby in the ways we think and talk about adoption of any sort? My book, which came out, it's almost 2 years old now, and it's becoming standard issue at adoption agencies around the country. It's called The Open-Hearted Way to Open Adoption, Helping Your Child Grow Up Whole. And its premise is that adoption creates a split between a person's biology and her biography, and openness is an effective way to heal that split. Now, I'm guessing the book probably appeals mostly to people who have an interest in having contact with their child's other parents, because we have this kind of implicit understanding that openness equals contact, whether that's simply an exchange of identifying information or full integration among families or somewhere along that spectrum. But I want you to think of openness as more of a mindset or a heart set that we employ when we're parenting via adoption. In fact, I suggest we add a dimension to what we've always thought of as this open adoption spectrum, where we have no contact on one end and full contact on the other. Because contact doesn't tell the whole story. And because contact as a measure may leave out families created through foster adoption and international adoption, so let's add in a new dimension called openness, and let's give our spectrum some dimensionality and turn it into a grid. What would that look like? So the first thing you might notice here is that contact is not the same as openness, and we're going to treat each measure differently. You can have neither, you can have one without the other, or you can have both. Now, I like to think of contact, which is running along across at the bottom. I like to think of contact as what happens among the grown-ups, the two sets of parents. And I think of openness that runs along the side in a vertical fashion. Openness is what happens within each parent, like a solo within you, and between the parent and the child, like a duet with your child. Now, you may only have partial control over the degree of contact, but the good news is you have full control over the degree of open-heartedness. I'm going to say this again. You may have only partial control over whether your relationships are towards the left or the right, because contact is also dependent on your child's other parents. But the level of openness, the elevation on this grid that you choose to parent with, is fully attainable with mindful work that you do on yourself. And this is another way of saying moving from fearful to fearless. So let's take a tour through this grid. In box 1, we have low contact and low openness. And if you know any adopted people that were born in the 60s or 70s or even 80s, this box is probably where they lived. Not only was there very little contact or identifying information available to the child, but the adoptive parents were also ill-equipped to deal with adoption openly. Maybe they have unresolved grief left over from their infertility struggles. Maybe they should have written a funny limerick about it. I don't know. They may have been counseled to act as if their child were born to them, as if their child were of their genes. They may have been told that their baby came to them as a blank slate, that they could write whatever they wanted to on. These people may not be comfortable having tough conversations and confronting icky feelings about adoption, either theirs or the child as the child grows and cognitively advances. So this box, box 1, excuse me, shrouded by shame and secrecy. This one may be the most crippling for a child to grow up in, the least conducive to integrating her identity from both her sets of parents. Not because they were bad parents, but just because they didn't know better. You're going to know better. So let's take a look. Oh, sorry about that one. So in box 2, we have high contact and low openness. We do have contact with the birth and genetic family, maybe through exchanges of photos or emails or maybe even meetings. But parents here may say things like, well, we follow our open adoption agreement, or, well, we're willing to send annual updates and pictures. But what's lacking in box 2 is the spirit of openness. Parents here, because they haven't processed their own emotions, because their hearts or their minds are still somewhat closed or fearful, they may harbor feelings of guilt or envy or even resentment about their child's biological family, either at a conscious level or at a subconscious level. And if they're using words like, well, we're willing to do this, then these adoptive parents may enjoy having all the power that they hold in the relationship, rather than inviting the other parents to co-create a relationship together. And because of the lack of this open-heartedness here, even with contact, the child is at a disadvantage, feeling split between the clan of biology and the clan of biography, because the grown-ups have made quite an emotional gap between them. So in box 3, we have low contact for reasons that may be outside the control of the raising parents, but we have high openness. Now this box is at play oftentimes in foster and international adoptions in situations where contact is either not possible or not wise. And it can also be at play in some domestic infant adoptions like our own in my home, where distance or birth family availability is a factor. Or perhaps in embryo adoptions where embryos were placed anonymously. But the parents in box 3 still parent with an open heart. They're able to deal with their own emotions about their family building story in a mindful way. And they aren't into putting their child's biology and biography into a hierarchy, into forcing the child to rank one over the other. Parents in this box have neutralized the word real, and they feel real from the inside. They're also able to acknowledge that their child's genetic parents are equally real, without that thought taking anything away from them. The parents here are able to open their hearts to their child as she processes her adoption story and integrates her identity. So finally, moving around the grid, we come to box 4, where the genetic family is considered extended family, both in contact and in terms of openness. And relationships here may be no different than relationships we have with a beloved uncle or a sister-in-law or a grandmother or any other extended family member, even ones that aren't so beloved, right? Because we know that sometimes we're connected through family to people that we're not crazy about, and we deal with it because that's what family is. So the relationships in box 4 are child-centered and inclusive. The child is claimed by and able to claim both her clans, helping her integrate all her pieces as she grows through her toddler and her school years, through her tweens and her teens and into adulthood. She's not pulled to choose or rank one family over the other, and she's therefore less split. She's free to integrate herself and to pursue wholeness in her identity. We want our children to grow up whole. So notice that the box that you're in can change over time, and these relationships, like all relationships, are fluid, and they'll have an ebb and a flow to them. Just because you have low contact at one time, for example, it doesn't mean that it will always be that way. I've been doing this for almost 14 years now, and there's sometimes we're in relationships, sometimes one or the other has backed away. And you can also see that if you have more than one child with different genetic parents, that you may be having two different fluidity things going on with this grid. So you do what you can to plot yourself where you want to be each step of the way. But just remember, you have more control over the longitude than you do over the latitude. So let's talk about how open can you be? This is a big question. And here are some sub-questions to ponder as you set your OPEN-ometer. How open can we be to our children's wonderings? Does it hurt us when they wonder about their genetic parents? Or in those moments, could we simply know it's not really about us at all? How open can we be to our child's efforts to discover and build his identity? Do you remember what it was like to build your identity when you were a teenager? That's tough stuff, even when you have all the pieces of your puzzle. Can you imagine what it's like if you're working with an incomplete puzzle? How open can we be to fully feeling our own issues about infertility and grief and adoption, and the fact that our DNA doesn't swim in our child's veins? Can we be open enough to acknowledge and eventually release our own pain? Can we figure out how to do this? Can we show our children how to process and release grief when they experience it? Can we uphold to them that it can be done by doing it for ourselves? Sometimes over and over again, because as we know, grief sometimes comes in a spiral, and you may think you're done healing from something, and then it comes around again at a deeper level, and you get to keep working on it and releasing it. And when we do that for ourselves, we can show our kids the way to do it for themselves. How open can we be to having difficult conversations as our child grows up? And how open can we stay while having these difficult conversations, such as, why isn't our hair color the same? Or, you're not my real dad. Or, why didn't they keep me? My children have asked me questions like these, and I've had to allow my heart to be open in that moment so that I could wisely answer them. I firmly believe that if I had a closed heart, which is another word for a fearful heart, I wouldn't have been able to serve my children as well in those very important and intimate moments on their journey. So openness then really isn't limited to domestic infant adoptions. It can clearly apply to embryo adoption or any case where there's a split in a person between her biology and her biography. And people are realizing that we don't need to turn nature and nurture into a hierarchy. We must encourage our children to value both within themselves because they carry both within themselves. So let's go back to Times Square or any hypothetical place where we might conduct a hypothetical poll with our hypothetical demographic of adult adoptees. Which answer was right and which answer was wrong to the question, which set of parents do you consider your real ones? The only thing wrong in this scenario is asking the question in the first place, because doing so splits the baby, the child, the teenager, the adult. So I ask you from here on, whether you are an adoptive family, whether you may one day be an adoptive family, whether you know an adoptive family, whether you may be a donor family, whether you work with adoptive families, I'm asking you to put away the sword, the figurative sword that we use sometimes when we talk about families and what is real or which is more influential to a person. Their biology, the DNA we're born with, or their biography, the life that's written by those we call family. Open yourselves to this radical idea that both have value, that both make a person, and that a child's heart can be so open and so big that he can love all his parts. And we, as the adults in their lives, we have to show it can be done by also loving all his parts. What might keep us from being open and vulnerable? What keeps us from being fearless? We may need to dig a little bit to figure this out. And that's where we get to our triggers and our buttons. Everybody's got buttons. And kids are really good at finding and pushing them, sometimes laying on them. Some of these buttons are plain old parenting buttons, and some are going to be adoption buttons. Many of the adoption buttons have to do with shame, the shame of infertility, the shame of not being allowed to swim in the gene pool, of not being genetically connected to your child, the shame of being a child not genetically related to his parents, of being different in looks, in temperament, in abilities, in fit. And it's likely that you may at some level feel shame about what's been denied you, something that comes so easily to others. And guess what? Resolving that shame in a mindful way will be incredibly useful to you one day as you help your child also deal with his own shame, the shame of rejection, of fit, of being different. Adoption exists with deep-seated shame. And the antidote to this shame is openness, not only for your child, but for you as well. The question isn't whether or not your kids will have complex feelings about the circumstances of their existence, whether or not they'll have grief and openness to work through. They will. The question is, will they feel comfortable sharing these feelings with you? Being open with them, being open with yourselves, it's with this mindfulness, this conscious excavation. That's what allows us to move from fearful to fearless. So one of the first things we've got to do is resolve our triggers. And I realize at this point that I'm talking a lot about the marriage. I'm talking about parenting as a journey. And some of you may be at the place in your journey where you're just wanting to get to the altar. You're planning the wedding. You really want to wear that white dress and be at the altar getting married. And what I'm going to talk about from here on out is more about the long-term marriage, which you need to have in addition to the wedding. So I just wanted to throw that out. The more triggerless you can be in your parenting journey, the more likely it is that your child will share their feelings and their healing journey with you, and the more easily you're going to be able to help them. You want this for your child, don't you? You want to be there walking alongside them when they encounter tough things. You don't want them to shut you out. You want to be open so that they are open to you as well. So let's look at some of the trigger examples. Though these are from the realm of traditional adoption, the principles are the same for families created through embryo adoption. So in this first example, last year there was a national morning show that aired a segment about an adoptee reuniting with her birth mom after 30 years. And in an online forum, a woman started a thread. She was incensed for two reasons. One, the birth mom was called Mom by the adoptee and by the narrator of the segment. And two, the adoptive parents weren't mentioned at all in the segment. Other adoptive moms on the forum chimed in with their hurt too, and there were pages and pages of outrage of how this segment went. So clearly this was a trigger for the people on this thread because they felt negated, they felt neglected, invisible, and demoted from their hard-won position as mom. They wanted their place in the hierarchy recognized and honored. Now, I'm not saying it's bad that they felt that way. We all have emotions that run the gamut, and some of them are icky and unflattering. But I'm saying that such hidden feelings can create problems for us and for those around us when below-the-surface emotions inform our above-the-surface words and actions without us even knowing that it's happening. So moments like this call for mindfulness. Now, notice also that that morning segment, the morning segment wasn't about these women at all, certainly not in the concrete. It wasn't their daughter who was calling another woman mom, and not even in the abstract. Why would they care what one woman calls another woman? But big emotions like these, when you feel the heat rising from your belly into your face, when you feel like you want to lash out, Those are signals that you have a trigger, a hurt place, something to deal with inside you in order to help make you whole. So I have another example here. It's another story where a new mom was lamenting around Mother's Day that her daughter's birth mom wanted to see the daughter on that day. But the new mom wanted the day all to herself because it was her first Mother's Day. So there was a debate on who deserved that first Mother's Day with the baby. Others told her, stick to your guns, you're the mom now. One said, the bio mom is thinking of herself first, but why does the adoptive mom have to come second? So I'm hearing a hierarchy there. These are attempts at hierarchy, and hierarchy is duality, and duality is splitting. Do you sense the fear in these women? So what are some buttons that got triggered here? What are the fears that were twitching so deeply that they were imperceptible at the surface, but so powerful anyway? It usually boils down to one thing, not feeling like the real mom or the real dad. But if we can heal that spot inside us, the one that fears we're not real, well then, we no longer have that button. Now, we have to ask them, what's it going to take for you to own your own realness? Do you think that when you've changed enough diapers or sung enough lullabies or done enough strapping in the car seat that somebody's going to come by and give you a license? There's a Bureau of Parenting that will come do this? No, owning your realness comes from within you, not outside you. Now, you may think that you don't have any buttons, but I'm telling you, you do. And I say that from experience and more than a little hubris. And I'm going to give you some homework on this. I'd like you to begin identifying any obstacles that you may have to the question, how open can you be? What are some potential obstacles that may keep you from staying open-hearted in your adoption? In essence, what triggers are you aware of? So what I'm asking you to do is kind of perform this ongoing sweep for any landmines that could be in your subconscious, and so that you can dismantle your own fears, your own hot buttons, your own below-the-surface triggers. What are some of your own personal triggers that you're aware of? Like the word real, or being called the grandma, that happened to me once and I had a reaction to it, or intrusive questions from friends or acquaintances, or your child one day saying blank to you, the most devastating thing you can think of. Maybe it would be something like, I wish I didn't land here, I wish I lived somewhere else, I wish I lived with my real parents, said to you in a yelling and angry way. If that triggers you, put it down on your list. You're going to start making a list. You want to find what's your worst fear. If you can dig deeply enough to find this, I guarantee you're going to be able to resolve it. Because here's the secret. Once you dig it out, it loses most of its power. And the key ingredient to this excavation is mindfulness. So your ongoing assignment is to create a moment of calm and mindfulness each day. For me, it's in the evening or at bedtime. And I want you to gradually add to your list of triggers. You're going to drop your level of awareness, find a moment of quiet to reveal these buttons like shells on a beach at low tide. Jot these buttons down as they come to you. If you feel yourself reacting to something during the course of the day, make a note of that for later exploration. You want to find your own buttons before someone else does, because then you can work on it and not have it be a shared experience. You can do it in private. So refer to your list during tough moments in your parenting journey as a way to distill if the problem is outside you or within you. This moment of distilling or of discernment, this is what can happen when you've made space for it. And that's what mindfulness is. It's simply making space for something, space making. The things that are on your list are things that you have full control over. It may not seem like it. But by and large, these are things that are in your power to deal with, to neutralize with simple awareness. If you have a tough moment and it ends up being not on your list, meaning something that's external to you, then you probably have a boundary issue. We cover a little bit about how to have healthy boundaries in the book. and how to set them, how to patrol them. But if you think about the people that you most enjoy being with in your life, the people that are the easiest to be with and the most enjoyable, they've probably done a lot of their own work on their triggers, and you don't have to tiptoe around them worrying if you're going to step on a landmine. And they probably have pretty healthy boundaries. They probably have figured out ways to let the good stuff in, keep the bad stuff out, and patrol their boundaries more like a border collie than a pit bull. And that's what you want to be able to do as well. So the last section we're going to talk about is moving from this either-or to a both-and heart set. And you see here in the candle the image of the Tao, and it symbolizes how we bring together opposites to create a whole. We join extremes in unity. We see this often in nature. We have night and day. We have summer and winter. We have masculine and feminine. Nature values both. The opposites are interdependent, and they can't exist in the absence of the other. Likewise, this parenting journey is not about trying to be all good, about having no triggers or insecurities or immature thoughts. Instead, I ask you to aim to be all aware and simply know when you're being triggered. Aim to choose your responses rather than react from unacknowledged or unhealed wounds. This is how we find unity from duality. This is how we merge for our child, their biology and their biography. This is when we become fearless rather than fearful. I have a confession to make. Choosing open adoption, which at the time to me meant contact, making that choice was completely self-serving. Now, back during my agency's adoption school, which was part of our home study, when being a mom was just a theoretical concept, I didn't embrace open adoption because the social worker said it was proving to be better for the child. I didn't choose it out of gratitude to the woman who would eventually make me a mother. I chose open adoption for selfish reasons. I looked ahead to the time when my theoretical children would turn 18, and I didn't want to go through the jealousy and the insecurity that I would feel at the time if they decided to wander, to seek, to meet their birth parents. I thought that would gut me. I thought I would feel betrayed. I worried that I would think my own children disloyal. And then I wondered how it might feel for them. By the way, that's the back of my daughter's head, and that's her birth mother on the right, who helped me with the book, and me on the left in the purple sweater. So I was concerned, what would my hypothetical children be feeling about that? How would it feel to be split between their love for my husband and me and their curiosity about their birth parents? Would they feel afraid to even wonder, much less search and meet their birth parents because of the feelings of disloyalty for me, because of my triggers? What lengths would my hypothetical children go to avoid triggering me, even at their own expense? What would they stuff down inside them because of my buttons? How could I do that to them, tear them in two? How could I wield a figurative sword against my own children? I think it's natural to wonder about one's origins. I would, had I been genetically grafted onto my family. This doesn't mean that all will wonder, because certainly I've met many closed-era adoptees who have expressed no desire to explore their roots. But if my children turned out to have the curiosity that I do, I didn't want them to have to mend an 18 or more year split. I thought that such an upheaval at that late teen, young adult stage of life would be incredibly complicated because of all that was missed and because of the enormity and the complexity of those emotions. How would you forge a relationship with a stranger who is also intimately integral to your very being? If I could prevent my hypothetical children from having to go through search and reunion, I thought while sitting in adoption school, I would. And the way to do this was to facilitate contact with biological parents from as early on as possible, or at least openness to talking about them in an emotionally uncharged way. That meant I had to resolve my own buttons and triggers, which meant I had to find them first. So I realized that to enable my children to embrace their both and, I had to shed my own either-or paradigm. Another way I continue to evolve from this fearful to fearless happens any time I get out of my own position as an adoptive mom and put myself in the moccasins of an adoptee or a birth parent, someone else in a constellation. This is why that family sculpting exercise at the beginning can be so transformational in getting people to see the situation as the growing child may one day see it. I continue to make this shift from fearful to fearless anytime I read blogs or memoirs of people who occupy a different part of the adoption triad than I do. There's tons and tons of adult adoptee blogs. There's tons of birth parent blogs. I think we're going to start seeing more and more blogs of children conceived with donor gametes as time goes on as well. We give a tremendous gift to another by simply seeking to understand their point of view, and doing so makes us less judgmental also. Speaking of judgmental, I once held some stereotypes about the sort of woman who would place a child for adoption. So a third piece in my personal evolution occurred the moment that we met Crystal, when theory became actuality. And this happened when she was about 9 months pregnant. She was just about ready to go. But I could see the lengths that this very real mother was willing to go to make sure her baby was taken care of. I could see that she was willing to face her own fears. She was willing to become fearless and possibly lose it all for the sake of the child she loved and claimed. I had to rise to that occasion as well and stretch myself. I had to figure out how to move from fearful to fearless. So I want to share a quick story with you from the book. This happened on my son's 9th birthday. I intuitively knew when Roger and I began formulating our open adoption that in loving our children's birth parents, we were giving our kids a precious gift, which in turn helps them fully love themselves. In addition, our aim is for Tessa and Reed to never feel as if they need to choose or divide their loyalties between their birth parents and my husband and me. I received validation that I was achieving my goal on the morning of my son's 9th birthday. "You're my favorite son," I hugged him good morning. In response, he hugged me back and said, "You're one of my favorite mommies." Now, there are two ways I could have interpreted his proclamation. Either that I am in competition with his birth mom and I'm not out and out winning it, or that my son's heart is so big that he can hold us both in it. The former notion would cause me pain and jealousy, and the latter would fill me with joy and pride. Which one do you think I chose? And this is how we neutralize, by being mindful of our emotions and our reactions, and then choosing them consciously in a way that best serves. So ask yourself, what are some ways that you can move from an either-or mindset to a both-and heart set? I want you to understand that the brain as an organ divides and the heart unites. The brain is designed to break things down to their smallest pieces, and the heart is the organ that we use to bring it all back together again. Two basic ways to make this shift from an either-or mindset to a both-and heart set include, one, some of these simple things we've been talking about. Put yourself in another person's place. It's called the golden rule for a reason. And two, being mindful and reflective of your own emotions, your own motivations and triggers. This means taking the time to tune in, taking the time to examine, take the time to consciously choose. Adoption creates a split between a person's biology and her biography. Openness is an effective way to heal that split. That's the premise in the book, and that's how we heal in adoption, with this both-and heart set. Right speech and right action and right response flows from that. So I'd like to close with a little limerick of my own. King Solomon asked for a sword. His wisdom came straight from the Lord. One mom, she said, split, but the other cried, quit, and the baby was left whole and adored. Thank you all so much for being with me today.